Christiana, let's just pick up with you. What did you see, I suppose, as the key takeaways looking at the four sessions that we've had today?
I've enjoyed today enormously. I think we got a lot of valuable contact. I hope anybody feels the same way. Interesting key takeaways. And I think the main key takeaways from a market panel was really that climate is an important factor. It's one of the main factors right now, but the S and the G still need to be taken into consideration, and also the other environmental aspects of the E. Then what I found a really, really strong message was that ESG is now a must-have. There is no choice anymore. It's mandatory. This is driven by stakeholders' demand, but also by regulation. Very interesting on the valuation panel, I found that there is a consensus and really an agreement that ESG compliance has an impact on valuation, but clear guidelines and regulations still need to be developed. There's a big focus on resilience to adapt to future changes and to be resilient to climate change, for example. And what I also found very interesting, that the role of the valuer is going to change towards a more consulting role.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, Christiana, that part around the valuation panel as well. I thought you could really see something beginning to change and some ideas beginning to take place there.
The legal panel, I think one of the key takeaways was to make sure to monitor international, European, and also national legislation, because we are also here, at the beginning of a longer development. Then it's quite important implement a different approach into due diligence processes to really anticipate future developments, to make sure that you can avoid future capex measures which come as a surprise. Make sure that you can rent, use, and sell your properties. And last but not least, it's about transparency, data exchange clauses, and also flexibility in long-term agreements.
I've just been struck over the day by the number of people who had registered, which was kind of almost 600 people registered for the session today, which again is, I think, clear evidence of how far this discussion has moved on. But also just that move much more towards the kind of implementation side of it and more of a kind of practical approach. Christiana, I don't know if you thought that as well.
Yeah, it really, that's, I think we also kind of touched on that at the very beginning. So the first step is developing effective strategies, and then the next challenge is implementing it. And it's really complex. It goes into all the different teams and the different processes. And I think Richard van der Linden said it in the last panel, it's about speaking the same language.
I think it's a really interesting side. And just in terms of your kind of overall takeaway, Christiana, at PwC, there's a newly created role for you as EMEA Real Estate ESG leader, which I think says something of itself. But you've been looking at sustainability for a long period of time. Do you see this really now beginning to accelerate much more than previously?
Yeah, it has accelerated over the last 12 months, and I see this process continuing for some while. So first, the other regulation we've been talking about today is just at the beginning. So I think we also touched on the occupier side. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fit into this process. So a lot will happen on that front in the next 6 months as well.
I thought it was interesting, that point around the change there with the occupiers, and particularly looking at what that side of it brings in terms of the cognitive ability and the and potentially how some of those things that might have been viewed as very, very soft could then form part of measurable value for a building, which I think is really interesting. And last of all, I thought in the tax panel, that discussion around the differences between ESG in taxation and general taxation, and potentially some of the changes that could make to actually potentially have a really big influence, I think, on not just the real estate sector, but more widely as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. So of course, tax will remain a cost factor, but kind of the role tax are being regarded is changing right now. They're also being regarded as an instrument for environmental and social value creation as well. I find that very interesting, and I also have been talking for a while now with Richard and Dave, and I see it very interesting to kind of implementing a new way in giving tax advice to really focus on the E, S, and G and all what you do. Yeah, and all the different aspects there.
Yeah, no, I think it's been really interesting. From my side, thanks very much, Christiana. Thank you to everybody at PwC and all of the speakers. Really interesting. Thank you also to you for all of your questions. Anything that we weren't able to answer, I'm sure, which were mainly UK ones, I'm sure somebody from the UK team will be getting back to you on those. But really interesting.
Thank you, Richard, to you, to your team, and to anybody who has contributed today to all the question. I found it very helpful. It's what we intended to do, to shed some light into the dark. And I'm really looking forward, and it would be great to maybe do that event in 6 months' time and see where we are then.